morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the exclusive talk or chat of the Prague European Summit 2020. We are going to speak about how European Union has tackled the COVID-19 crisis, which influenced everybody and changed almost everything this year. Our guest is a man who has been the busiest, or at least one of the busiest people in Brussels in recent months, because he is in charge of the EU's crisis management. And this year, everything was about challenging or dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Please let me welcome European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Janez Lenarčič. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for joining Prague European Summit 2020, at least so virtually from Brussels.
Good morning. Greetings to Prague.
Thanks. Before we start, one reminder for our audience. If you want to ask our distinguished guest, you are very much welcome to do it. You can use the Slido right next to our stream, right there your question, and I will put it to Commissioner Lenarčič in the second part of our chat during Q&A session. But let's start our talk. Hopefully we won't have any technical crisis in next 25 minutes. Commissioner, during spring and summer there were a lot of debates about how prepared or rather unprepared was EU on a crisis like this. What is your opinion? Could EU do more and react better than it did in the beginning, or we simply weren't prepared for a crisis of such a scale?
Well, I have to recall that the European Commission started very early, already in January, warning the European Union and its member states that this may be a grave danger for public health. And our message was centered on the following. We called for preparedness, we called for coordination, and we called for solidarity. The fact is that health, border controls, civil protection, these are all areas that are the national competence of member states. And this has been quite a challenge since the beginning to ensure that member states do work together to the best extent possible. The Commission has very few powers in these areas, and nevertheless it acted proactively, it acted early, it offered a number of recommendations and guidances in order to help the EU member states tackle this pandemic. Now, understandably, the level of preparedness, as we now see, in the spring was low, and this is understandable because we have been dealing with an epidemic of the proportions that nobody could recall in one's lifetime. The last such thing that we know about was the so-called Spanish flu immediately at the end of the First World War. So it is difficult to be prepared for something that you don't know, that you have not experienced, and that was the case in the beginning of the year. That, of course, has improved. I think that the European Union and its member states have been much better prepared for the second wave through which we are going at the moment.
Since then, a lot of measures have been taken by European Commission, by the member states, but now we are in the middle of the second wave of the pandemics, and we see again problems, ill rates and death rates growing. What went wrong that many countries, like for example Czech Republic, have the situation worse than in the spring, even though these measures and recommendations you were speaking about?
Indeed, the second wave and its intensity has again surprised some member states, I would say. And this in spite of the fact that the Commission already in July, before the summer holidays, issued a comprehensive package of recommendations for the member states concerning their preparedness and resilience for the possible second wave. And my colleague, Commissioner Kyriakides, responsible for health, warned in September that we should not lose our guard, we should not relax, and we should react quickly to increasing numbers of infections. And she said, I quote her, "This may be our last chance to avoid the spring scenario." She said that in September. So I think that member states were a bit reluctant to introduce stricter measures. Perhaps there was some delay, a week or maybe two, but in such a pandemic, 1 week can mean a huge difference. Now, as we see, the measures were tightened in most of Europe, and they are already showing results, including in the Czechia. In Czech Republic, the number of infections has been now stabilized, and the curve has turned downwards. Now, we hope that this trend will now continue and that we will go back to the low numbers of infections, numbers that will be low enough to control the pandemic with measures that are less intrusive, less harsh than the lockdowns.
What about the cooperation of the member states? We saw a lot of unilateral steps in the first months of the crisis, closing borders from day to day, lockdowns and so on. All of that contributed to the chaos of that time. Now states are trying to coordinate more their steps, but again we can witness vain attempts to unify some cross-border measures. So how does member states work together to tackle the current crisis, and how important is this cooperation for solving it?
Well, chaos is a bit too harsh a word, I would say. Yes, there was a lack of coordination in March, and it lasted for a couple of days. And we could see that in uncoordinated border closures and things like that. But the Commission reacted immediately and forcefully. And after a couple of days, these long queues that you could see on the borders between some of the countries were gone. And we don't have such problems now. But the challenge remains when something like health is in the competence of member states. It is a challenge to ensure coordinated action, because the coordination of such issues that are the responsibility of member states is first and foremost the responsibility of the Council of the European Union and its presidency. Nevertheless, the Commission offers a lot of recommendations. You mentioned travel. Let me recall that in the beginning of September, the Commission offered a recommendation how to coordinate travel-related restrictions among member states. And it took almost 6 weeks for member states to agree on how they will coordinate this. This is the so-called traffic light system. So, and they were able to agree that there will be no restrictions for people coming from the green zones, but they were not able to agree completely on restrictions that would be in place for orange and red zone. And at the end of the day, this whole package, as it was adopted by the Council, by the member states, is non-binding. So the member states still are responsible themselves alone for measures that they take. That's why we do continue to face this challenge of trying to get the member states to act in a coordinated manner to the extent possible.
Speaking about the coordination, that means also solidarity, which you already mentioned. I would like to ask you on solidarity of the Central Europe in the crisis time. In other areas, we could see that countries of this region didn't feel solidarity with the rest of EU. Also in the spring, for example, Czech government refused to send medical soldiers to Italy to help there. Would you say that Central European countries have had enough solidarity with other members in this crisis?
I insist that there has always been solidarity in European Union throughout this pandemic. There was a problem in late February and early March when one member state, Italy in that case, asked for assistance and it did not get it soon enough. But this was not due to the lack of solidarity. It was due to the lack of personal protective equipment, which was a problem throughout Europe. The proof for what I'm saying is in the following. First, once that the problem of personal protective equipment was no longer so big, this equipment started to flow to Italy and to all other countries that needed such equipment. Also, medical teams went to Italy from a number of countries, including from Romania or Norway through the EU civil protection mechanism, and so on. And you will remember, in the middle of the first wave, there was a big earthquake in Zagreb, in Croatia. Croatia asked for assistance. It asked for items concerning the shelter, generators, foldable beds, and so on. But it also asked for personal protective equipment to deal with the pandemic, because it was faced with two challenges, the fallout from the earthquake as well as the pandemic. There was immediate response by a number of EU member states who sent assistance to Croatia through the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. However, the items that were sent to Croatia were related to the earthquake. There were no personal protective equipment sent, although Croatia also asked for that. Why? Not because there was no solidarity, because there was a lack of equipment. And this, in my view, is the biggest difference between the first wave and second wave. We, and especially the European Union member states, are now better prepared. For the time being, we don't have any indication of any severe shortage of medical equipment. There are some isolated cases when member states still ask for assistance, but for that we now have also European reserve in place, which we started to build already in March, so as to avoid a repetition of situation that we had with Italy. And this European reserve of medical equipment has already been used in countries including Czech Republic, which asked recently for assistance in the ventilators. Part of the assistance in ventilators came from this European Union reserve, in addition to equipment that was offered by Austria and the Netherlands through the Union Civil Protection Mechanism.
Speaking about Central Europe and also one current affair, which is also asked by one of our followers. What does it mean for European crisis management that Hungary and Poland is blocking the next MFF with the Next Generation EU fund? Is it a problem?
This is a very serious problem. This is a very serious problem. And I hope that this situation will be resolved sooner rather than later. The recovery instrument has to start functioning as soon as possible. There are many jobs at stake, many survival of many companies, especially small and medium enterprises. All of this is at stake if this deadlock, if this blockade that happened in the Council will continue. The urgency needs to be understood by all. And I hope that this situation will be resolved, because it would otherwise affect very negatively the ability of the Union to fight the pandemic in general and to start a recovery and resolve the issues that we are facing. So I regret the blockade that happened. I hope that it will be lifted for the sake of everybody, including Poland and Hungary themselves.
Teresa Novotná asks, if European Commission also collaborate with Asian countries such as South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and so on, to manage the crisis much better, which lessons were learned from such countries which already gone through the pandemic crisis?
The European Union has to act globally because the pandemic is a global problem, and we need to eradicate this virus on a global scale. If we don't do that, we will not be able to defeat this pandemic. And the European Union has started to do so very early. Already in January, China requested assistance. At that time, the epidemic was limited to China only. And the Chinese request for assistance was met with a positive response. China asked the European Union civil protection mechanism. We activated it, and a number of countries, a number of European Union member states responded positively, and there was assistance that was delivered to China at that point. China then reciprocated. When the epidemic spread to Europe and when it started to be really intense in March, China provided many European Union countries with its assistance. It also donated through the Union Civil Protection Mechanism some personal protective equipment that we sent thereafter to the most affected EU member states. In addition to that, we put in place the so-called Team Europe initiative, which brings together European institutions, European Union member states, and European Union financial institutions like European Investment Bank to finance the assistance to the countries around the world in order to fight this pandemic. Again, we need to control the virus everywhere in the world. If we don't, it won't be controlled anywhere.
Thank you for mentioning the Team Europe, because that was also one of the questions that our followers sent us. Many questions are related to the competences, health competences of the European Commission. Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic will push the EU member states into passing on competences in health policy area to the EU level? And I would add, should the Commission also have more powers in crisis management to deal with a crisis like this one?
One of the lessons from this pandemic, which is quite clear to me, is that European citizens want more Europe in situations like that. Obviously, European citizens are aware of the fact that when we are facing such a challenge, which is trans-border challenge, which affects most or all European member states, we need to have more European action, more Europe. That is clearly the wish of a large majority of the European citizens. Now, the treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, defines the competences between the European institutions and the member states. And this division of competence is clear. And we are not arguing for transferring the competence that the treaty gives to member states. What we are trying to do is to give the European Commission more power to help European Union member states in a crisis like this one. That is the main aim of our initiatives, both in the area of civil protection, where we have proposed strengthening of the Union civil protection mechanism with a view to enable the European Commission to support European Union member states in situations like this and not to transfer the competences. The same ambition is in the health area, where the European Commission has also submitted a number of proposals to strengthen the European Union role, the European Commission's role, and the role of certain European Union agencies like European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, ECDC, as well as European Medicines Agency, to be better able to help EU member states when they face a pandemic like this one. So it is not about transfer of additional competencies from member states to the union level. No, it is correct to expect that the health and civil protection will remain the competence of member states. But what we are trying to do is to enable the Commission to help member states in case of need, to be able to help them better when they face a situation like we faced in the spring and like we are facing now during the second wave.
We have time for a very last question, so I will ask you to be quick as possible. And maybe not so positive question, but is this type of public health crisis the potential end of the Schengen zone? What do you think?
This crisis does represent a big challenge for Schengen. That's why we have to be very careful not to lose Schengen. Schengen and Euro are the most visible, the most tangible achievements of our union, and they must be protected. It is for this reason that the Commission proposed this traffic light system and tried to help the member states coordinate much better the way they manage their borders in the conditions of pandemic. We insist that travel and transport of goods have to be ensured also during the pandemic. There is no proof that travelers carry greater risk of infection with them than those who don't travel. We need to preserve the Schengen area. We need to preserve the operation of the single market. These are vital foundations for our union. And of course, if there are restrictions necessary, they have to be first necessary, they have to be proportionate, and they have to be taken in close coordination with other member states, especially the neighboring ones.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your answers. That was a Commissioner for Crisis Management of European Union, Janez Lenarčič, who joined us from Brussels. Thank you once again for joining and for your answers.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. And we will be soon ending, so thank also to you for your questions, for joining our really interesting debate on a very hot topic. But this chat is not the last one today. We will have another one at 6 o'clock, again with me and with Margot Wallström, former Swedish foreign minister. We will be speaking about the global role of European Union. And in between, there will be many more interesting debates at the Prague European Summit 2020. So stay connected, follow us, and enjoy the rest of this very interesting evening. From my side, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.